So in the past years, I have shared with you the flower seeds that I will be winter sowing in that specific year. This year, I'm going to share with you my favorite flowers for winter sowing. These have done very well for me. Now, I am growing in New Jersey, Zone 6B, and our last frost is generally about Mother's Day. Now, you may find some flowers that I may not have listed, but it's just flowers that I haven't tried to winter sow. And if those have worked for you, you should definitely continue doing that. So I will be breaking down this list that are annuals, perennials, and natives for my zone. I'm also going to share with you a few herbs. And lastly, I'm going to share a very short list of things that I don't winter sow. So the first list is annuals, and that is the longest list that I will be sharing. So for annuals, I love straw flowers and gomphrena. They have always excelled for me. And if you're going to try to winter sow some flowers this year, I definitely recommend some straw flowers and some gomphrena. Last year, I tried verbena and ageratum. Both did wonderfully in my winter sowing and were very successful. Some other favorites are pincushion flower, marigold, nasturtiums, borage, and chamomile. So I will put up this list so that you can take a screenshot of all the different annuals I have tried that have worked very well with winter sowing, so that maybe you can choose a few from this list if you're trying winter sowing for the first time this year. So for these annuals, I generally don't start winter sowing these until late February or early March. And in some cases, I've even done the winter sowing method in spring for some of these annuals. So for perennials, what I have winter sown in the past are echinacea, yarrow, feverfew, hyssop, bee balm, milkweed, and foxgloves. And they have all done wonderfully for me. And those are the ones that generally I do start winter sowing those in late January, early February, because these types of seeds require some cold period so that they will germinate in the spring. The natives that I have tried are mist flower, asters, goldenrod, and beard tongue. These have successfully winter sowed for me the last 3 years. Now, I haven't been able to actually get most of them to survive or put on growth because the deer and rabbit keep eating them, but I have now transplanted those into a garden where it is protected, and I think I should be able to get those to finally grow. So for herbs, I have done cilantro, dill, basil, sage, and parsley. And I have been pretty successful with all of them. Parsley can be a little bit more difficult, but I have had germination on those. So now for the flower seeds that I don't winter sow. Now, this could be controversial for some, I suppose, but it's just not my preference to winter sow these flowers. And the first one is zinnias. Now, zinnias are flowers that really like the warm weather. The second they get the warm weather, they're going to sprout. And they sprout really quickly. So there's really not much need for them to be winter sown. They put on flowers in about 50 days. So you really can just start them in the springtime and enjoy them throughout the summer. There is no reason to really winter sow them, and there's no reason to risk them dying off with some early spring frost. Cosmos is another one that I haven't winter sown. I have seen that a lot of people are successful with cosmos, but for some reason, cosmos don't like me and don't like my conditions for winter sowing, I guess. And I've just never been that successful. I'm lucky if I get 1 or 2 plants to survive and get them in the garden. So I just decided I don't even like cutting on cosmos, and I don't know. I did actually throw out some Cosmo seeds in my garden, and maybe I'll get a volunteer Cosmo or two, and I'd be happy with that. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be winter sowing Cosmos anymore. And the last one is snapdragons. I have winter sown snapdragons, and they do successfully germinate for me. My issue with winter sowing snapdragons is that the days to maturity for snapdragons is about 100 days. I have a growing season of 150 days. Snapdragons are a cool flower, and they're not going to flower during the summertime. And that's usually when they put on their full growth. But I'm not going to get to see a flower. If I'm lucky, I get to see some flowers in the fall from those snapdragons if they didn't die off in the summertime because of the heat. So last year I tried growing snapdragons indoors, and it worked much better for me. So I'm going to actually try a few more snapdragons, and I'm not sure that I'm going to do tall snapdragons because I was a lot more successful with some shorter varieties and putting them in pots, because those did pretty well for me. So now I'll share with you just some of the things that I plan on winter sowing this year. So as you may already realize, straw flower is one of my number one flowers for winter sowing, and I'll be growing these varieties that I grew last year. But then I'm also trying this dwarf version that I found from Burpee, and I'm really looking forward to this. I've really enjoyed putting some dwarf flowers in my flower pots. So looking forward to this one, and hope it does just as well, because I may not want to grow quite as many in the landscape. So the next is Gomphrena, and this one is one that I really like in the landscape, but I also ordered a Buddy Purple that I'm still waiting to get, and that one is a dwarf variety that is a vibrant purple, like a really electric purple, and I absolutely fell in love with it last year, so I would be growing that again and putting that one in pots. The next that I really love winter sowing is marigolds. And so I got this one from Botanical Interest, which is a French marigold, and it's dwarf. So this one will be going in the veggie garden. And then this one I've grown for the last couple of years, and I absolutely love it. And I tend to put this one now in the landscape. So the area where I usually called it, or last year I called it, the cut flower garden, is now really going to become a butterfly garden. But, I do like to cut on a few flowers and make a mason jar arrangement here and there. But I barely cut on flowers. So that one is really going to be dedicated to a butterfly garden. And I want to add this one because it has some dainty flowers, which works really well with some of those mason jars. Now, I've tried several nasturtiums, including the one with the variegated leaves, but I was never crazy about the flower color. But this year I found this one from Swallowtail, which is a vining nasturtium called Moonlight. And it's this nice, bright or buttery yellow. And I like the fact that it's vining. So I want to try this up against the fence and maybe on the arbor. Now, for perennials, I'm only doing two different kinds. I am doing this Penstemon Mystica, and this one I want to add in the front garden. Not really sure if it'll be resistant to deer and rabbit. When I researched it, there was some mixed information about it, and I didn't really want to buy the Proven Winners plant, which is really what I wanted, the Penstemon. So I figured if I tried it from seed, and I can see whether or not it does stand up to the deer and the rabbit, then maybe I'll invest in the Proven Winners version. But otherwise, I'm going to try this in winter sowing this year. And then Delphinium is another one. I tried it last year, but they were super old seeds. So I know that it really probably more had to do with that. So this year I have one from Swallowtail that I bought late last year. And then I found the actual one that I had winter sown in my very first winter sowing, which is this version from Burpee. And that's the one that I had germination with. So I'm looking forward to this one. And then I'm trying out 4 different natives. And the first one is Pearly Everlasting. Now this is a host for some butterflies, and that this is actually going to go in the butterfly garden. So I want to try and create that one a little bit more with a mix of natives in there. And I want some host plants. So milkweed is in there and coneflowers, things like that. The next one is clustered mountain mint. I've heard great things about it, but mostly it's because mint is part of the name, which deer and rabbit do not touch. Now, this has the silvery bracts on top, and they almost look like white flowers but they actually do have some white flowers as well. And it really looked pretty in the pictures and videos that I had seen. So this is for the front corner garden where I do have quite a bit of deer and rabbit traffic. I think it'll stand up to that. Next is cardinal flower, and I've tried to winter sow this before and was not successful. I know it's a little tricky to germinate, so I'm going to try this one more time. And last is this common milkweed. I already have the swamp milkweed, which I had winter sown last year and had some pretty good success with that because even though not a whole lot germinated earlier in end of April, early May, they actually germinated later on. And what I did is just plant the entire container into the ground, and then several sprouted afterward. So I do have maybe like 5 or 6 different plants out there. And in order to become a monarch way station, you do need to have at least 10 milkweed plants. And they prefer that you have 2 different varieties of milkweed. So this will be my second variety. So how I decide when to actually start my flower seeds in winter sowing is I use the Johnny's website. So the Johnny's website has a grower's library, and that's where you will want to go. And in that library, you're looking for the seed starting date calculator. And that's the page that you want to find. And you can scroll down and enter your last frost date here. So in my case, I am using 5/11/2025, which I believe is Mother's Day this year. And then I can tell when to start my seeds indoors and then when to set them outside in the garden. So now, since we are not starting our seeds indoors, we want to change this date to 2 weeks earlier. So in my case, it's 4/27/2025. And that will give me an approximate of what I want to sow my winter sowing flowers. So Azuratum, I want to start March 2nd to March 16th. Celosia, I'm going to be doing around March 9th and March 23rd. And you'll notice that for Delphinium, it actually lines up with the timing that I would have used, which is January 5th to February 16th. So this really is a great tool if you're kind of wondering when I should start what and when for winter sowing. So if you don't know your last frost date, go to garden.org and then go to useful tools and go to frost date lookup. Enter your zip code, and then it will give you a chart which will give you the various percentages of the temperatures in your area. And what you're focused on is that 10% column. And you want to drop down to the 32-degree mark. And that's the date that you want to count as your last frost. Perhaps that might be helpful for you for what to winter sow now and what to winter sow a little later for your exact growing conditions. That's not to say that if you have winter sowed everything in January and you get beautiful results, go right ahead. You should absolutely continue to do what works for you. But this is generally what's worked for me. And so I just like to share that in case anyone is struggling and perhaps this could be useful. So I'd love to hear from you. And what are you winter sowing this year? Is this your first year winter sowing? Or have you done this for many years? And maybe what's been successful for you in your growing zone? I would love for you to share, what growing zone you're in, maybe the state you're in. That is helpful to others that might be reading your comments. And also, if you have questions, please drop them down below because I would love to be able to answer some of your questions and maybe try to help you out. So I also have videos from past years of what I have winter sown, as well as reveals of my winter sowing, and then also transplanting them outdoors into the garden. I have done also last year a couple of garden tours trying to focus on the flowers that actually winter sowed and how they were doing throughout the season. So I hope this was helpful for you, and maybe you found a flower or two that you're going to try winter sowing this year. And I hope to see you again next time. Bye.